All right, so I'm so excited to welcome Charlotte. Charlotte is originally from San Francisco, and she graduated in 2020 with a bachelor's in environmental science and a minor in forestry from the University of California, Berkeley. This is her second year of AmeriCorps, and she previously served in the San Jose area doing urban forestry and sustainable landscaping. So I'll pass it over to Charlotte to talk more about her work with the Western Shasta Resource Conservation District this year.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jasmine. Just to check, is my screen sharing correctly?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great. Cool. Yeah, so I'm Charlotte. I served this year with Western Shasta RCD up in Shasta County. I guess I'll give a brief kind of background or context for the work I was doing. Shasta County, it's a very low density county compared to the rest of California. Like a lot of more rural places in the Western United States, it has a significant percentage of public lands between two quite large national forests, a national park, and other like BLM lands. There's a lot of publicly held land in the county. And like a lot of California, there's a very sort of ever-present threat of wildfire, both visible on the landscape and kind of in, social, like having social consequences in kind of people's minds. A lot of the area around Redding is still kind of recovering from a very significant and destructive wildfire, the Carr Fire, that occurred a few years ago. That like the landscape is still recovering, and when you talk to people, like people's sort of own ideas of what living in this area in the future is going to look like have definitely been very affected by these large destructive fires. Because the cost of living is generally a bit lower here than it is in other parts of the state, there's also an increasing pressures from growing suburban expansion around Shasta County. This is particularly located in the kind of valley areas, but you also see this a bit in some of the more forested communities. For example, I have a drawing there for a graphic of the downtown Redding sort of revitalization campaign currently that's underway to kind of bring more commerce into the town. And this leaves the county in a sort of state of transition as the population is growing and the natural resource industries such as mining, logging, and farming have been declining in economic importance over the past few decades, as they have in a lot of rural America. I'd like to highlight the working lands of Shasta County. Along with all of the public lands, there's still quite a lot of privately held working lands, such as timberlands, rangelands, and other landscapes that are held by both industrial and small non-industrial landowners. This kind of map I have here I took from SPI's website, and you can kind of see a lot of SPI's land holdings are located in and around Shasta County. This picture here is kind of from the RCD office, looking across the street where SPI's large mill and operation is. You can kind of see their logo on their water tower. And many of these working lands are at most risk of being lost to conversion to suburban development, particularly our oak-dominated ecosystems and rangelands that are kind of around Redding and the rest of the valley area. While there is a lot of sort of small forest landowners, forestry operations are kind of increasingly out of reach for these landowners. While in past decades, the timber revenue from their operations could be used to offset the costs, like the upfront costs of bringing in labor and machinery, that's not really feasible so much anymore. for a number of different reasons. And so government cost share programs such as CFIP have become increasingly vital to really get land management done, especially on private lands. So the Western Shasta as an RCD has been around since the 1950s, making it one of the older RCDs in the state. We worked cooperatively with landowners, public agencies, and other nonprofits with areas of focus, particularly in forest health and wildfire resilience, of course, but also watershed restoration, and managing a number of conservation easements, mitigation sites for habitat improvement and resiliency. You can see this picture here is of the Clear Creek restoration. This is a decades-long restoration process to rehabilitate Clear Creek, which was extremely damaged through pretty destructive mining operations all throughout the kind of 19th and into the 20th century. There's kind of a picture of me there planting oaks, and the whole banks along that river are just like broken up rock. There's it's like a very expensive and ongoing restoration process that the RCD has been involved in for quite a while now. For the rest of my presentation, I'll be going through a number of projects that I helped out with, and kind of a through line of the various projects that I spent most of my year working on was really thinking of these questions about how can we better steward our forests to preserve the characteristic landscapes of Shasta County and continue them into the future, especially in the face of climate change, pressure from development, and the other realities of global warming. A fun project that I kind of got to take the helm on was coordinating with the Shasta County Fire Safe Council to implement a number of community wood chipping events. So these were kind of free wood chipping services that the RCD brought to a couple of key fire risk, fire-wise communities. So these are communities that are both at high risk of wildfire because they're quite small, pretty isolated. A lot of them only have maybe one major road in and out of the community, but also have a fire-wise designation, meaning that the community has done some organizing on their own to work together and kind of become more organized for wildfire prevention activities. Pretty much everyone that you talk to up here knows that defensible space is necessary. It's very common public knowledge. You don't really have to educate most people that much about the realities of living in such a fire-prone landscape. However, logistically, it can be pretty difficult for homeowners to actually implement that knowledge and create their own defensible space. There's, especially in these smaller kind of rural communities, some of which are literally like 100 or fewer people. You have a lot of older residents who just might not be able to do that level of intensive manual labor anymore. Or even if there are people around who can help them out with that, just figuring out how to dispose of large volumes of cut vegetation can be difficult if you either don't have equipment yourselves, or if you're maybe a newer resident who's moved up to the area and you don't have a lot of experience doing things like pile burning. So with these free community wood chipping events, the real goal was to help jumpstart these communities so they can start taking charge of their own defensible space and wildfire prevention going into the future, to get neighbors together to kind of start those necessary conversations and empower people to continue the ongoing work of wildfire preparation that they're going to have to continue doing into the future. These are kind of fun events to do, physically kind of labor intensive, but everyone in the community always really appreciates when you come by and offer to help them with this kind of stuff. So they were kind of fun days. There we go. No, skipping ahead, of course. Okay. I was also involved on a couple of different projects constructing or maintaining shaded fuel breaks on both public and private lands. The kind of background picture here is from the Swayze recreation area. So this is a BLM managed public recreation area that was at one point a pretty dense oak forest, and then it got totally burned up in a couple of wildfires, and is now a very dense landscape of snags, burned vegetation, and resprouting oaks. And the RCD worked with the BLM to implement some shaded fuel breaks along existing hiking trails and mountain biking trails. The idea being that if you can use these already existing trails to create areas of lower fuel density, you can slow the progression of the inevitable wildfire that will come through eventually, and create kind of a more heterogeneous landscape instead of having the entire landscape get lost in one wildfire. I was also involved in the landowner outreach for a maintenance project on a very large 500-acre or more fuel break that we have in kind of southeastern Reading. This project, the China Gulch fuel break, crosses a lot of different private land parcels, as you can kind of see from this footprint here. And working alongside private lands is definitely necessary work, but it's also can be a lot more challenging to get projects implemented, because instead of talking to, say, one public agency, you're talking to like 100 small landowners, and a lot of whom are now absentee landowners as people have moved away over the years, especially after kind of a couple of the larger wildfires. So that was definitely a fun process to kind of get in contact with everyone, and asking for permission to do maintenance on their lands. Another project that I worked on that I found really interesting to learn about was the Whitmore Home Hardening Initiative. And that's kind of the RCD's name for our part of the California Wildfire Mitigation Program. So this is a statewide program that's currently operating pilot projects in 3 different counties across different areas of the state. And Shasta County is one of those 3. The ultimate goal of it is to provide a certain amount of funding to targeted residences in targeted communities to harden them against wildfires, meaning to upgrade the construction of the home in some way to make it less susceptible to burning or getting completely destroyed. We know from research that if enough homes in the community are hardened, that can really help slow down the spread of wildfires and can reduce the overall damage to these WUI communities. Our project that's located out in Whitmore, which is a very rural town, kind of in the western part or the eastern part of the county, kind of as it goes from the valley floor up into the hills. We really focused on identifying low income or family communities households with people with disabilities who couldn't really do a lot of defensible space work themselves. And I mostly contributed to this project by doing our site assessments. So we'd go out to a home where we contacted the landowner and they were interested in the program. And using a CAL FIRE created Survey 123 app, we would systematically catalog the home construction and defensible space, going super in depth, everything to like the vents, are there any openings in the wall over 1/8 of an inch, all the windows, all the doors, literally everything you can think of the exterior home construction and its surrounding landscape to try to identify vulnerabilities in the home and create a kind of ranked order of, in the case of a wildfire, what would cause this home to be most vulnerable that we could potentially address through home hardening. Currently, the actual implementation of home hardening construction is set to begin this fall, which is pretty exciting, considering this project has been a long time in the works. It is, without a doubt, the most complicated project I've ever worked on, involving just a really high amount of collaboration between like RCDs, agencies, state agencies, federal agencies, private contractors. It's definitely like a very necessary realm of work, but it's one that you can really tell we're all sort of deciding what the future will look like as we're planning the projects, which is both exciting and challenging. Oh, here we go. My favorite project to work on this year, and really the highlight of my year, have been working on forest management plans. So these are helping small landowners better access these cost share programs by writing forest management plans for them. As things like CFIP are pretty competitive programs, it can really help a small landowner if they have a management plan that was created by an RPF, and will give them a better chance of getting access to that funding to do things like thinning operations on their land. I was mostly able to contribute to our forest inventory surveys. So these are your classic like timber cruising. And it was really fun to get to practice skills that I'd learned back in school, things like you're using prisms for basal area, all that kind of stuff, as well as getting the chance to try out some new tools, things like forestry lasers, which are such an easier way of getting tree height. Amazing. And kind of through doing these surveys, just getting the time and the multiple days to kind of traverse one property. A lot of these were kind of under an 100-acre property, so like an 80-acre forest or like a 50-acre forest in different parts of the county. And getting that chance to really spend some time out on one piece of land, I felt gave me a much greater depth of understanding of the landscape. Having to navigate by compass and traversing over these landscapes by foot, I definitely felt like I got a lot of more chances to learn how to sort of read the landscape and read the history.
I'm on.
And read the history of past management on the landscape. On working on our forest management plan, the one I was mostly involved with, I got to like read through old timber harvests, old archaeological survey reports, and then able to go out onto the landscape and really identify like, okay, here's the skid trail that they were talking about, here's the railroad grade that you might not know what you're looking at if you aren't looking for it, but once you kind of learn to read that history of the land, really the kind of effects and consequences of every person's past management decisions are still so clearly visible on the land today. Here, there's like tons of old historic irrigation ditches across the landscape up here. A lot of them are from the kind of, could be as far back as like the gold rush era or kind of into the early 20th century. And that was Evie. She helped us out a lot on our surveys. As well as kind of all the families that have lived on this land kind of leave their histories as well. This was this like ship's bell near a family cabin. I'm not totally sure why it's there, but someone put a ship's bell up there. And I guess my general reflections when I was thinking about what have I really taken away from this year, my reflections from the Winco parking lot here. As I kind of move on into future roles in resource management and land management, I really think the big kind of takeaways I've gotten are thinking about what will the future of rural life in this part of the state look like. You know, going forward, we know communities will have to become increasingly coordinated to really achieve the level of communal work it's going to take to require to survive really in the face of a changing climate. And like, how can we help communities achieve that? And yeah, like how can we bring all of us and the landscapes and the ecosystems together kind of into the future? I also was kind of reflecting that as land managers, so much of our time is spent addressing or fixing mistakes that, you know, past land managers made, things that they thought were good at the time, you know, whether that's like removing blue oaks from rangelands or questionable watercourse decisions. And today we end up spending so much time readdressing things that we thought at one point were like the right decision. So I really have taken, taking into the future the idea of how can I make sure in any management plan or any decision that I'm making that I'm not just creating a problem that someone 20 years or 50 years or 100 years from now is going to have to fix for me. And I think that's definitely something that as kind of natural resource specialists, we really have to always keep in mind, you know, you're not just creating a management plan for today, you're creating it for, you know, all the future after you as well. Yeah, and that's kind of the conclusion of my year. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. That was a wonderful presentation. Yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourselves. Looks like we already do have a question in the chat from Brandon Smith. He asked, survey 123 and any more info that you can send about home hardening.
Right, so that Survey 123 app is made specifically for the California like wildfire mitigation program. So I don't think it's really publicly available. But all of like the home hardening guidelines are, I think, publicly available now on CAL FIRE's website. You know, it might take a bit of digging to really unearth like all of the Chapter 7A compliance rules and all of that. But yeah, all of the guidelines that app was built off of are, I think, on CAL FIRE's website.
Okay, great. And yeah, it looks like there's lots of appreciations for you in the chat. Great job, Charlotte. Awesome job. Important work you're doing. Nice work. Yeah, again, thank you so much, Charlotte.